Welcome to Crosstown Cardboard episode 69 with myself, Carmine at Carmine's Cards, the sports storyteller down here in Greenville, South Carolina, but born and raised in Westchester County, New York, and my partner, Craig, at New York City Sports Cards, the math teacher, the soccer coach, originally from Long Island, now working and giving back to the youths in New York City. And we're calling episode 69 No Reservations because we have a special guest, Katelyn at Cold Lunch Cards. And the title will make sense once you realize who she PCs and the grail she just acquired of that man. But Craig, as you so eloquently do, can you please introduce a little background on our guest and why we brought her on for episode 69?
So I'll paint the picture. It's 2023 National in Chicago. We were at our trade night that we hosted. Carmine, I was sitting at a table with you at the beginning of the night, and a guy comes over to the table that you were wheeling and dealing with. Let me tell you, I did not like this guy's energy at all.
Okay.
He was a little too intense, just very fierce. I feel like you might remember what I'm talking about. So as you're doing deals with this guy, I'm like, I need to change the scenery. So I look across the room. Here's a nice young man and a nice young woman sitting there. I'm like, this seems like good company. So I go on over. There's Calvin and there's Katelyn, our guest. And we were kicking it for about an hour or so, just having a good time. Kind of stayed in touch via Instagram with Katelyn here and there. And now we got you on the podcast. So Katelyn, thank you for joining us. How's Minnesota treating you?
Well, thanks guys for having me on. This is so great. It's so good to be back, Craig, and talking to you, and then Carmine, of course. We met at that trade night, and it seems like we just kind of kept in touch. You and Kelvin, who we mentioned. It all started at the National, at my first ever National, at the first ever trade night I went to. So
there you go. That was my first National too. Craig, how many Nationals have you been to? At least a couple. Two?
Just two. Yeah.
Okay. So, Craig, why specifically did we want to have Katelyn on for this episode?
So, Katelyn collects someone who I respect, and I've never heard someone collect before. And the moment that, Katelyn, you posted that you had an Instagram story that you picked up your grail, that's when the light bulb went off for me. Like, we got to have you on, talk about this card, the person you collect, and why. So, why don't you just get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into it. So the person that I collect is Anthony Bourdain, which you could describe him as many things. But the one thing that I would say he sticks out as to me is just an author, first and foremost. But I'm sure people know him as like his TV presence. So having many different travel shows, cooking shows. People talk about him being a chef as his like primary occupation, obviously. But I think that's, for me, he was a chef, but first and foremost, he was an author and an inspiration to people and all around the world, really. So, I'd love to talk about, how I found Anthony Bourdain and how I found out he had cards, because apparently everybody and their mother has cards these days. But let's start with like how I got into Anthony Bourdain and then how I got into his cards. So growing up, my dad was a massive news fan. Any news you put on TV, you know what I mean? He'd watch it. He'd sit there and he'd watch it. And what would come on after the news was Parts Unknown, or No Reservations, per the title of this episode, which was Anthony Bourdain's cooking and traveling show, where he would travel all across the country and the world to talk about food, politics. The human condition is really his like major topic that he talks about, just dealing with existing as a person. And I would sit down and I would watch it with him just from a very young age. And I would just take it all in. I would just sit there in silence. Each episode was about 45 minutes to an hour long. And it was like going to school. You'd sit down and you'd just learn something new every time you watched an episode. So really that like bond that I had with my dad watching Anthony Bourdain is what sparked my, desire to collect something of his, or, fandom of his. Now, in terms of his card scene, it's scarce, to say the least. Anthony Bourdain has two known, to my knowledge, and I'm sure there's many other Bourdain collectors that know a lot more than me, but there's two sets. There's one, which is the big set in 2014, which is the Allen and Ginner. And then he's also in a Garbage Pail Kids set a couple years later, but it's a lot less significant. So the card scene, basically, I just want to tell this one story about finding Anthony Bourdain. So I went to a local card show when I was like a senior in college. I think it was a couple years ago. And there's this guy sitting there, and his case was full of hockey because, we're in the state of hockey in Minnesota. And I'm not a big hockey fan, but I saw in the case a picture of Anthony Bourdain. And suddenly I was like, that's all I need. I just need to buy this one card, and then I'm going to go home. I bought like 3 cards from him, so that didn't actually work out. But I saw for the first time an Anthony Bourdain card in existence. And it was the 2014 Allen and Ginner base card in a PSA 10. And talked to this guy, eventually established a pretty good working relationship with him in terms of finding and buying cards. And he gave me a good deal on it. And that kind of fed the addiction to where we are today. So that's kind of a little background story on how I got into it.
What a cool connection with your dad, watching after the news, coming on, no reservations, like you mentioned, per the title of this episode. And so your appreciation for Anthony Bourdain came first, and then were you a collector, and then you found that he had cards? How exactly did those two worlds come together?
Yeah, it was really like a perfect combination of worlds colliding. From a young age, I always collected cards. So I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, obviously home of the Packers. And I remember everybody had cards as a kid because the crossing guards would give them out at school. Or I'd go to the dentist, and if you didn't have any cavities, instead of getting like, I don't know, a toothbrush or something, they give you a pack of cards. And like that fueled it. That was like the very beginning. That was awesome, first of all. That's really cool. But that was the beginning. And then I kind of got away from it for a little bit, just, life as a young kid. Then in high school, I got really into TTM. So through the mail autographs, you'd like write a letter to a player, and you'd send a card and they'd send it back signed. Got into that. And then was working my first job, and it was next to a Target. And the Target had 2017 Prism blasters in 2017, to which I said, I'm going to spend my entire paycheck here. And I bought a ton of Prism. I should have bought more, knowing now that Patrick Mahomes was in that set. But just ripped packs in my car between, when I was working at the grocery store, and got out of it then for a little bit, kind of forgot about it. Patrick Mahomes was not starting in 2017. He was not what he is now. And got back into it in college and really took it seriously after building kind of an online presence. And, as Craig talked about, once I got to the National, that's when it kind of propelled into a true hobby for me.
Yeah, because obviously we know you collect Anthony Bourdain, which must be challenging because there's not a ton out there. But it sounds like you are, from what I gather, you also collect football, and you're doing buying and selling and trading, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the first thing I collected was the Packers. I mean, being from Green Bay, it's like the number one thing in the world. It's the only thing that matters is the Packers when you live in Green Bay as a kid. So I collect Packers. I also collect, some of my favorite female athletes. So athletes like Lindsey Vonn, Naomi Osaka, Chloe Kim, just to name a few. And then I also collect vintage. Has been like my new kick the past year. Just thinking of different cards I've owned. We'll talk about it with acquiring the Grail. Vintage was really what made it happen. So I'm kind of all over the place. My goal is that when I set up at a show, people will come up to my case and be like, "What?" Just be so confused that they'll have to stop and talk to me about it.
Well, we talk about that on here
great
a lot.
strategy. That's right. That's a great strategy.
Thank you. Yeah.
Come on, we say that on here. We want our tables to represent us. We want someone to come up to our table and be like, "Oh, okay, that's what you collect."
Exactly. It doesn't have to be this monotonous. Everything is like shiny gold prism, which is nice too, but like, the same things over and over, and just show some cool, unique stuff. So that's what I try to do.
Right. And that's exactly, Craig has a Jackie Robinson card with a penny in it.
Oh, I just sold them. I just sold both. They sold on eBay yesterday. Funny you say that, but regardless, continue with the point.
Well, it makes sense that we would bring it up while it's sold.
Oh, nice.
So we have to tie it together. But like this Muhammad Ali, I just posted on my Instagram today, this 1 of 1 from a piece of a robe he wore in the 80s. And like you said, just a unique card. And if you look on your page, and anybody on YouTube can see, it's hard to put you in a box, Katelyn, because which I think is kind of the theme. You know, you have no reservations with your collecting style, because if you look, you have Packers, but you also have, like you mentioned, your vintage. You have Roberto Clemente, even George Mikan, and you're only 22 years old. You also have Dave Portnoy, Allen and Ginter autograph. You have Holly Holm, who, of course, is world famous for knocking out Ronda Rousey and winning the championship in UFC. Would you call yourself an old soul? I mean, how do you at only 22, you got a George Mikan card. That's not very common.
Right. No, I wouldn't say it's the typical path for a 22-year-old in collecting, but I think I just am a lover of sports, of all of it. I was raised by a coach and raised in a city that's built on sports. And it's just it feels like it's just in my blood, played sports growing up. And I don't know, there's no limit, I guess, to what sports can do. And I really do feel that like collecting what you like is so important, and not feeding into any sort of like hype or anything like that. Just finding things that you think are cool, and then it'll be easy. It's not like a difficult thing to collect things that you like. So I try to just, if I see a George Mikan card, I'm like, oh, that's a Minnesota legend right there. You know what I mean? Like that, for instance, everything has some sort of tie in some capacity to my, I don't know, passion for sports and passion for collecting.
Yeah, shout out to the Minneapolis Lakers, George Mikan's old team. But Craig, what are you thinking for next question?
So I do want to touch upon looking at your page and a very eclectic mix of cards. The Dave Portnoy, the autograph. What's the significance of that one between you and I?
Well, that one is very, very special, actually. It's funny that you call this one out. So speaking of the National, when I was at the National, yeah, there it is. There it is. When I was at the National, I had hunted the entire day, because I only went for like a day or two, to find a box of 2014 Topps Allen and Ginter, which is what the Anthony Bourdain cards come out of. It's the same set. And I had asked, I kid you not, every single vendor that had wax for sale if they had this box. And it was like impossible, like actually impossible. I was so surprised. They had every other year but 2014. Then I went up to this woman who happened to be working one of these massive, at the National, they have these massive wax booths, just like, it seems like hundreds of thousands of cards available. And I was like, do you happen to have this? And she was like, it says in our system we have it, but it's not on our shelf here. And I was like, you need to find it. There's no like it needs to happen right now. And she's like, okay, I'll be right back. And she walked the entire way from where she was set up to the parking garage, which if you've been to the National in Chicago or in Rosemont, kind of a hike. Turns out the box was in their car. The only box was one box of 2014 Allen and Ginter Hobby. I ripped it that night in the hotel, and I pulled what is arguably one of the better chases in 2014 Topps Allen and Ginter Dave Portnoy auto.
When I went over to your table and we were just sitting chopping it up, you just had that sealed box sitting there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're just holding this hobby box. Like, what's the story? And the two people that you said the autographs to look for, you said Anthony Bourdain and Dave Portnoy. So when I found out later that night you had ripped it and pulled them, oh, that was cool. I was staring at that box when it was sealed.
It was pretty cool. And I still kept the entire box as well, just as like a, momentum from that trip and from trying to pull Anthony Bourdain. So
that's great. So we're talking about the sports storytelling, which is my job, which, shout out to your dad because he's a news watcher. Shout out to my news station, Fox Carolina. I really appreciate that. Keep the local news alive.
Absolutely.
But we're talking about your Instagram handle before we started recording. Cold lunch cards. Can you please explain where that came from?
For sure. Yeah, I get this comment all the time. It's actually so funny. So when I started going to local shows, all I had was like a little box, like a little cardboard box that you'd get that can just hold a couple top-loaded cards. Because I was a pretty, I don't know, new collector who didn't really know what they were doing when it came to like buying and selling and trading. And I was like, you know what? This doesn't feel right. Everybody around me has these massive Zion cases or like suitcases full of cards. And I said to myself, I'm gonna need something cooler than that. So I outfitted my Carhartt lunchbox to fit all of my cards. I went to the Container Store and got customized containers to put into my Carhartt lunchbox and carried that around shows everywhere that I went. And it just kind of stuck. And now I've had like little kids come up to me at a show and be like, "It's cold lunch," and I'm like, "No way!" Like that name stuck. So now I'm stuck with it forever.
And you have cold lunch cards, and I believe you also referred to me the other day a giant SGC slab as a lunch pail slab.
A lunch, yes, a lunch tray.
Lunch tray. That's Katelyn's own hobby terminology. When you have a jumbo card like 1965 Topps Joe Namath it was in it's a tall boy, so in the bigger SGC slab, Katelyn referred to it as lunch tray.
Yes.
So that
an
was
affectionate term. I love the big slabs. I love the lunch trays. I think they're just comical. Which is so funny.
Lunch trays. That's a great name. I never even thought of that. But why the cold part? I get the lunch box, but why the cold part?
I don't know. I never even had cold lunch as a kid. I think it was more like an alliteration thing, having like cold lunch cards. Sounds better than like lunchbox. You know what I mean?
Hot lunch cards does not sound the same.
Oh,
yeah. So it was kind of just like trying to build my little brand. Like it's not massive, but it's come a long way since I came up with the term, which probably would have been a year or two ago now.
Okay. I'm interested to go back because we're building the suspense. That's one of the crosstown cardboard. We don't want to shoot too many rounds off at the beginning. We want to save some in the holster because we're going to get to your grail pickup.
Mm-hmm.
But why is the dentist and the crossing guard giving out sports cards? Is it just because Green Bay is such a sports town, a sports city, or why is that the case?
Because it's the perfect city. That's probably my answer. I will never apologize for loving Green Bay as much as I do. I just remember, I think if you look it up, this is actually interesting because today I bought a card that has a similar story. But the police departments used to give away Green Bay Packer cards. I don't know if they do the same for other professional sports teams, but the Green Bay Police Department would have a pack and it would have each and every player on the roster and then like a fun fact about community safety on the back that they would hand out at schools, and the crossing guards would distribute them. So that's probably the reason for crossing guards. To tie it back to a card that I bought today, I bought a 1998 Skybox Fleet Farm parallel card, which were given out at select regional fleet farms in the Midwest and are ultra rare. So random things like that. And I suppose my dentist was a sports guy. He was actually a bookkeeper for my basketball team growing up. So he just wanted to spread the joy of collecting to kids. If I still were to go, I would still ask for a pack of cards because they were pretty cool. They weren't bad cards. They were pretty nice.
Wow. So we have crosstown cardboard and crossing guard cardboard at the same time. Craig, how would you like to set up Katelyn's grail story? Because you know more about it than me.
Well, what I appreciate about this card is if you are listening to this right now, we all know what Allen and Ginter, everyone knows Allen and Ginter, no matter what sport you collect. And I think you're familiar with a certain parallel, we'll call it. So I guess just hit us with the card first. What makes it so rare and special? And then how did you go about finding it, getting it, the process?
Absolutely.
If you want to show it, share it with us too, because you have not posted it on your Instagram yet. So a little sneak
exclusive.
It is. It's hard to tell here, but it is sitting right there behind me, gracing the background. But yeah, the card is called the 2014 Topps Allen and Ginter framed mini autograph of Anthony Bourdain, red ink out of 10, hand numbered. Long name, and all of it is very necessary to encompass how fantastic and legendary this card is. In my opinion, it is the best Anthony Bourdain card in existence, full stop. So as I said, Anthony Bourdain really only has 2 sets, Topps Allen and Ginter, and then the Garbage Pail Kids, which is a less desired set. And the Allen and Ginter has obviously non-autographed parallels, which I'm working towards as well. But then they have autographed parallels. And there's the non-numbered, which looks the same, but it has a black or blue ink, depending on who's signing it. And then there is one other single parallel, which is the red ink numbered out of 10, hand numbered. And just to take that all in, it's really the most desired Bourdain collectible in the card world, in my opinion, because of its elusiveness. There's never been a public recorded sale of the card. The card has never showed up anywhere, to my knowledge, on any social media. And the card has no trace whatsoever. You can find that there are 2 graded in a Beckett slab, but they have yet to surface. There's no scans of them like there would be for PSA, right? So they're kind of these mysterious, I don't know, grail is the only word they can use to describe it. And just a little fun fact, red is my favorite color, so it makes it just that much sweeter that the autograph is signed in red and not another color.
What number out of 10 is it?
I believe it's 7.
7 out of 10. That feels right.
I'm confirming.
What do you think the value? So, okay, it is number 7 out of 10. I'm looking on Card Ladder here, and these cards are expensive, very expensive, and the ones that are not numbered out of 10, in the standard ones.
I gotta look now.
So can you? I mean, because you know better than us. I mean, this is your guy. So
yeah,
what is the price of the estimated value of the non-numbered 2014 Topps Allen and Ginter Anthony Bourdain auto? And then what is your thought on how valuable yours is, the out of 10 version? As Craig reacts to how expensive these cards are.
Yeah, this is a very expensive card. I never thought I would own this in my entire life, to be quite frank with you. The unnumbered versions, I believe, fluctuate anywhere between $1,800 to $3,300, depending on the condition, depending on who's buying it. In all honesty, these are kind of inelastic goods, to bring up my econ degree, right? You can name your price and anybody's going to buy it. Anybody's going to buy it. When you see an Anthony Bourdain sale up on eBay or see one up for sale, if you want it, you should buy it. You should not haggle over $1,000, which sounds crazy, but it's
just pay the extra $1,000. That's how rare this thing is.
Yeah. I'm serious. Like, this is one where you don't really want to mess around, because people take them and then they never come back up for sale ever. So I put the unnumbered around $2,500 raw. Now, I've had a lot of discussions with people that I know are Bourdain collectors and people that I know are Allen and Ginter collectors, because it's kind of this intersection of very niche communities. The Allen and Ginter community I love. It's super strong. If anybody listening is into Allen and Ginter, extremely large presence on Instagram with like super fun people that are collecting and much more knowledgeable about this than me. But that, combined with Anthony Bourdain's kind of fandom and the fact that he attracts an audience of collectors due to his death, is truly adds a premium that I don't even know if I could put a true like number on it. I've had a range anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 put on like the value of the card.
What?
I know. And that's not what I paid for it. So like, I do not have the funds to be doing that, nor do I think that's like a financially sound decision. But yeah, that's like what I've been told by people who know more than me about what it's worth.
Damn. Good for you. But how did you get it? Like, how did this card come across your radar?
Yeah, well, that's the key. I think the number one thing is eBay saved searches. Oh my God, like the greatest invention of all time. Whoever created that should get a raise in royalties for every eBay saved search that results in a grail being acquired. No, but I just had a save search on eBay that I try to make them as, here's a little bit of strategy. I try to make some that are super pointed and some that are super broad so that you can capture if people know what they have or they don't, right? Because there could be somebody that's like, what is this card? I don't know what cards are. Anthony Bourdain autograph. That's it. That's all they put in the listing. Turns out I check every morning if Anthony Bourdain has been posted on eBay, and turns out one was. And the guy who had it listed extremely below whatever I just said it's valued at. And I don't want to make it public, like the complete sale, the complete like value of the sale, just for purposes of keeping it private. But let's just say I would have binned it if I wasn't interested in a trade. It was extremely cheap in my opinion. So what I did was I contacted the seller who had extremely reputable, reviews and feedback. And I, did the whole, hey, could we do this off Instagram conversation, which he was a little hesitant at first. And then he agreed and he followed me on Instagram and he had 5 followers. And I was like, oh, this is
red flag.
Scary. This is scary.
Red flag.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But good eBay reviews, right?
Exactly. So we start chatting and I'm like, hey, any chance you could come down on the price? He's like, no. I'm like, okay, respect. There's nothing wrong with that. But would you be interested in a trade? And he was like, I only collect vintage cards. And I was like, well, I have some vintage cards for you, sir. Like, this is perfect. So I think we talked for on and off that day, which was, here, I have it written down. December 12th last year is when I found it on eBay. He responded the next day on Instagram. And that day on Instagram, I swear I was glued to my phone. I was probably supposed to be working. And I was like, okay, I cannot give you that dollar amount, but here's my entire collection. Pick out things you want to trade. I will trade anything. I don't care. And I had recently had 2 really great pickups. I had a 1933 Sport Kings Jim Thorpe rookie card and a PSA 1.5.
Nice.
Which was a beautiful grail card for me that, I still mourn the fact that it is no longer with me, but that is beside the fact because of what it was in exchange for. So he picked out that, which is roughly between $1,500 and $2,200. That's a different one. That's another thing. Yeah. That one's good too.
Jim Thorpe, what a jawline, by the way.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Handsome
Absolutely.
guy.
But he picked out that Thorpe, which was valued I was like, okay, that's fine, take it. And then he picked out a Jim Brown 1958 Topps rookie card and a PSA 3.5, which was another $1,000 card or so. 2 biggest cards in my collection. Those were the outliers in my collection. I'm not like made of money over here rolling in super expensive cards. And I said to myself, take them. I was like, Daniel, whatever your last name is, with 5 followers, you can have these 2 cards. I don't care. Like, literally take them. And he was like, okay, we agree on the value of these cards. Now let's make up the difference. And I was like, oh boy, I got to put up this cash. I got to send him these cards. I don't have any protection as, a trade agreement whatsoever. And I have to trust that this guy has this one card that has never surfaced and that he's going to send it to me. And so I love Daniel now because he went along with all of my antics. He wrote up a contract and had it notarized at the bank.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was going to say maybe you got some Facebook vouchers, some Instagram vouchers.
Oh, this is so legit.
You said we need a notary public.
Fully.
Cool.
Yeah. And he went to the bank and he said, here it is. It's notarized. Sent me a copy, sent me his driver's license as a, assurance that he was not going to steal an absurd amount of money from me. And he said, okay, well, let's overnight the cards to each other. And I and I did it. And it showed up the next day at like 10 a.m. I documented the entire process on my Instagram. My mailman was involved in the process. He was excited about it. He had no idea what he was delivering, but he was excited. And yeah, it showed up, and now it is mine. And it was like so simple, yet so, I don't know, a testament to being a collector, where you're waking up every morning, you're looking at your eBay saved search, you're hoping something pops up, it never does. And then one day, you know, there it is. And Daniel has now told me, since like making the deal, he was like, within the first 24 hours of that card getting posted on eBay, I had responded to him in 3 minutes from what he posted.
Nice.
And within the first 24 hours, it had over 40 viewers or 40 watchers, like people who had saved it. And he got like 8 to 10 messages, like being like, where did this card go? Like, I would have paid double what you had it listed for, or like things like that. And he was like, I actually did give it to a collector, so it is gone. And now it's in its final resting place, which is my office. But it was insane. It was like surreal. And if people have like a grail that they're going after, they know the feeling of just feeling like it's never going to happen. Like nobody else in the world has that card, but you do. So it was really special.
What a story. I mean,
Wow.
Can we see it?
Yeah, we can see it. We can see it. It's back here. Let me grab it.
Yeah. While you do that, so we always talk about, Carmine, how there's like a hobby higher power at moments. Like,
Yeah.
What are the chances Katelyn finds this incredibly obscure card, and the guy is willing to trade that card for the vintage cards that she has?
Yeah, I know. It was like
You can't script that.
all the work that you had done. I mean, the countless number of times you had checked eBay and come up empty with your save search.
Oh yeah.
But then the cold lunch cards collecting style, you know, alley-ooping yourself to get the grail in the end, because most people probably wouldn't, especially 22-year-olds, wouldn't have a vintage collection that this guy was looking for. I mean, it seemed like even when he messaged you, he was doubtful that you would have the cards that he would like, but you ended up having them.
Yeah, it truly was a higher power in the hobby. Truly. I just have it sitting here. Here we go. I look at it every day.
Nice.
There it is.
Wow.
It lives up to the hype.
It does.
If you know, you like the Ginter red ink. If you know, you know.
Exactly. That's all there is to say. If you know, you know.
So,
And I have it paired up with my other in-person autograph that he signed that I picked up from a collector.
okay, so I was going to say, so you never got to actually meet Anthony Bourdain.
Oh God, no, I wish.
Okay. So I know you don't want to say what you ended up dealing it for, what you ended up getting the red ink card for. What was it listed for, though, on eBay originally?
$6,000.
Okay.
Which I would have bought it if he didn't respond to my Instagram. That's for sure. That is, if anybody sees one up for $6,000, buy it, and I will buy it from you for 20% tax.
You heard it.
Wow.
You should
Anthony
buy
Bourdain. Big bucks Bourdain. Wow. I had no idea. I loved Craig's reaction of finding out how expensive those, not the out of 10, but the base auto is. That's woo. Well, good for you.
They command a lot of money.
Yeah.
So what next as a Bourdain collector?
Ooh.
You hit the mountaintop. Like,
Yeah.
how do you even look for another Bourdain? I don't know if he had like minis in that set, maybe like the 101 mini wood. I don't know if that was a thing then.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So Alan Ginter is known for having just like the weirdest parallels, right? Like just hand numbered things, flag backs, glossy parallels, which I've been working on slowly but surely. I have 4 of the like run so far. I have the mini Allen and Ginter back, and then mini black border. There's like 10 more that go after that. Now, I want them, but now that I have the red ink, it's less enticing to go after those, but I still want them. I think the biggest thing as a Bourdain collector coming up next is the non-cards, which is very interesting to say. As somebody who doesn't collect anything other than cards, In 2019, Anthony Bourdain's estate went up for sale. He passed away in 2018, and the estate sale went up in 2019. And they auctioned over like 100 items of his that were in his personal possession, ranging from suits, so like suits that he had tailored for him, comic books that he read, the infamous, you guys will find this crazy, the infamous highest sale was his kitchen knife, which went for $185,000.
That's a lot of Allen and Ginter red ink autographs.
Exactly my point, though. That's my exact point with the valuation of this red ink, is that it is the most desired card. And so when comparing it to these other things that had sold in 2019, you have things like his knife, things like his apron, cufflinks for his suits, random things. And I think one of the things I'm looking forward to is maybe getting, at some point, I don't know if they're out there, but I'm putting out the bat signal, one of the CIA, which is the Culinary Institute of America in New York City, which is like the best chef school in the world, where he went to school, like a signed hat or apron or chef jacket that has the CIA logo on it.
Well, Carmine, we'll be in Atlanta for Culture Collision in a couple weeks, so you've got at least 2 individuals right here looking out for Bourdain items for you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, everybody should be looking for them. There's more Bourdain collectors too. It's not just me. They're in the wild too at your local card shows randomly. I promise they're there. You just gotta get them out of their shell.
Wow, I knew Anthony Bourdain had a crazy following as the traveling chef, and then the human condition, because being in TV, I've watched like superstar people and try to pick out, okay, well, this person has an incredible following.
Mm-hmm.
What do they do or how do they go about what they do that has allowed them to connect with people on such a deep level, where somebody on the outside would say, this person's just traveling around the world, trying different food, describing it to you, and meeting people from different cultures. But what is it like? I think the term I really liked what you said is the human condition is what he put forth and tried to explain.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, and it literally pays off with how expensive his items are. I mean, I would have never thought that this guy's garnering that type of money.
Oh yeah. And like the people that love him, right? Like this guy had international fandom. Like speaking of like my favorite show that he had was Parts Unknown, right? One of the most famous episodes that he had was in Hanoi in Vietnam. And they roll the credits. It's intro of Anthony Bourdain walking, around Vietnam. He's having a drink or having something to eat. And they're like, okay, kind of teeing up this big event that's going to happen in the show, and nobody knows what's happening. Cut, and boom, it's him and President Barack Obama having dinner together in Vietnam in this small restaurant. People just leaving them be, letting them eat, letting them talk about politics. And it's just like things like that, where he commanded such an attention and so much respect, not only from people who lived in pretty poor countries and poor conditions that he traveled to, but also people like President Barack Obama, and he was able to kind of walk that line because of his life experience. Like we all know, or if we don't know about Anthony Bourdain, I shouldn't say that. If we don't know about him, he was a heroin addict and he struggled with addiction his whole life. And so to be able to talk about addiction and talk about, being a chef and not really making it in New York City for a long time, he didn't really get that fame until his early to late 30s. So we're talking about a guy who struggled and really worked for his craft and for his respect. And then he got it. And then he got the entire world. And he got to sit in a restaurant with Obama, like all these different things where he's able to really, anybody, he takes them as they are and he shows them him. And, I think that's why people respect him so much and are so willing to pay the premium that Anthony Bourdain items command.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely the ups and downs, and we've seen it in so many other people, but of course, Anthony Bourdain is the topic today. But the ups and downs that people go through allow them to have a better understanding of the ups and downs that other people go through. And Speaking of the ups and downs, and I made sure that it was okay to talk to you about this before we started recording, but I was just reading up on Anthony Bourdain, and of course, just like his life, his death was always very well known. June 8th, 2018, Bourdain died while on location in France, filming for Parts Unknown, his TV show, of an apparent suicide by hanging. So how does his not only life, but also death and the tragic way in which he passed away influence your thought about him and maybe your collecting affinity for him?
Absolutely. And, just because of the sensitivity of the topic, I just want to, preface with like thanking you for talking about it to me beforehand. And hopefully everybody here can understand the gravity of this type of conversation, because it really does. And I say this because it makes me really mad. It makes me mad that he killed himself. Like, as a fan and as a person who admired him and looked up to him, it's just, the quick thought is just, I'm angry about it. But, you have to realize that this guy went through probably some crazy stuff as a human being. There's this episode of Parts Unknown in the French Alps, which is where he committed suicide, with his best friend and also excellent chef, Eric Ripper, who's like one of the greatest chefs in the world. He's a French chef, and they're in the French Alps and they're eating cheese boards and they're drinking wine together on top of the French Alps overlooking beautiful scenery. And Anthony Bourdain just can't stop talking about dying. He just can't stop. And Eric's sitting there and they're talking about the human condition. And it kind of was this episode, which looking back now, we know he was struggling through addiction at that point in time. And it turns out that place is then where he ended up committing suicide in the French Alps. So there's so much, if you watch Parts Unknown, you can see those ups and downs and you can see that. And I think that really does contribute to my collecting of him, as like, this guy lived a full life, even if it ended early. Like, it was such a full life and he brought so much life to other people, whether that was people that he worked with, whether that was his daughter that he left behind, whether that was one of his wives or people he fed food to. You know what I mean? That is what makes collecting him so cool, is because if you meet another person that loves him or loved him as a person, it's just immediate connection with that human being. Just immediate respect for how much you appreciate what that person did. So, I hope that answers the question. It got kind of deep, but that's how I feel about that whole situation.
Well, yeah, because his life and what he tried to put out there while living was much deeper than just food.
Oh yeah.
And then the gravity of the way he passed away, like you said, when you meet somebody who collects Anthony Bourdain, you know that there's a strong emotional attachment to him because of everything, the arc of his life. I mean, I can't imagine what is it like when you meet another Anthony Bourdain collector. Like, what are the conversations like?
Awesome. It's awesome. You know what I mean? Like, the conversations are so great. I'll tell one more story about, I was at a local card show and the guy who I was referring to earlier, where I went up to his table, I saw a Bourdain card for the first time. I was at his table at a local show this past year, and a woman walked up, and she was a Vietnamese woman. She walked up and she was on the phone with somebody. And we were like, what's going on here? I have this conversation secondhand from my fellow collector, but she's talking on the phone to somebody in Vietnamese. And she looks down at the Bourdain and she's like, it's him. And, my friend's like, what do you mean? Turns out this woman, one of her family members over in Vietnam, is like partial owner of that restaurant where Anthony Bourdain and Barack Obama ate dinner together. Wow. Right? Like, that's a connection literally from all the way across the world, that you're coming together on a piece of cardboard, so that's really like the epitome of collecting Anthony Bourdain, is you just get anybody that has a connection will tell you about that. So cards.
What a way to pay tribute to and just connect to the people and the athletes you love. That's why we love this.
Precisely.
Hey, Katelyn, you listed your hobby goals last week, and one of your goals was to participate in a piece of hobby content. Does this count?
Check.
Boom.
Yeah, seriously, thank you guys. This is so fun to talk about this and share, my passion truly of collecting Bourdain and talking about Bourdain. I could go on for probably hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, wow. Who would have thought? I mean, what a unique person to collect. But I mean, like we said, it's not only about Anthony Bourdain, because I was looking at your page a little bit more too, Katelyn, and the Daniel Craig autograph,
Oh, yeah.
007, and I really like your collecting style. Different pop culture figures, but also the vintage at the same time. It's like a history of sports and in the history of pop culture. I mean, the respect that you have for the history of sports and pop culture at the same time is, I think, unique and very cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's the guiding thread through the randomness that is my Instagram page and is my collection, is just, cool things that are cool and things that mean a lot to me. Yeah, it's funny you bring up the Daniel Craig. That's a random card that I just needed to have one day, so I bought it.
Is he the best double? I know I'm not
Yes.
a huge 007. Is he the best 007 though?
Yes, and that card specifically is from his best, in my opinion, James Bond film, which is Casino Royale.
Yes, that was my favorite.
If you know, you know.
I really liked him in Knives Out also.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there you go.
Katelyn, where could we, anyone, find you other than your online presence? Do you have plans to go to shows? Do you have local shows where you live?
Yeah.
You set up at shows.
I set up once in a while. I don't have a ton of inventory. Most of what I do setting up is to fund personal collection pickups. But yes, I'm at Cold Lunch Cards online on literally every platform. And then I'm based out of Minnesota, out of the Twin Cities. So I'm at the monthly club shows and the monthly Brooklyn Center shows. So if you know, you know. And then I'm planning on going to National again this year in Cleveland. So if there are any Bourdain collectors out there, please reach out. I would love to meet up, and I'll show you all of my cards and my things. I have non-card Bourdain things as well that we can discuss. And I'd love to buy every single Bourdain card. Bring them all.
That's great. Well, we also want to, before we let you go, Katelyn, ask you, because we asked this question to our close buddy Oz at the People's Mailman when he acquired his grail, which was Allen Iverson. So if you want to check that episode out, it's a few episodes back. Great guy, great story on how he got his Allen Iverson, similar to your grail hunt. But what advice would you give to somebody like, me and Craig collecting New York Knicks cards, or I'm a big Larry Bird, Magic Johnson collector? What advice would you give to somebody who's looking for their own grail?
That's such a good question. Well, first of all, you have to figure out what your grail is. That's the harder question than finding it, right? In my opinion, is determining what that holy grail is. So start with that and let your passion dictate where you're looking. People will reach out with things that they see, that if they know you're looking for it. And as my new friend Daniel said, I'm happy to sell this to a collector. So make sure that you're just, being genuine in your interactions with people, and what goes around comes around.
That's great. And I always like the phrase of keep knocking at the door and eventually somebody's going to answer.
Oh, yeah. If you're on eBay and they don't respond, you need to keep sending the messages. Have your friend make a burner account and message the seller. Never stop. Never give up.
Persistence is key.
For sure.
But, okay, Katelyn, thank you for taking the time. Obviously, we met briefly, but it was nice to get to know you even more and really hear. But you can't fake passion. You can't. And that definitely shined through today. So thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me on. I absolutely love this podcast and love watching and listening. So thank you for having me.
Let's go. And we're happy to check that goal off the list of participating in hobby content. And man, what a great story, Katelyn. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us.
Come on. Peace.
Oh man, that was fantastic.
That was so fun, guys.